Dark transit. A leaf whipped past Agatha's face. It was kind of shocking how cold it was as she waited for the streetcar. She cinched up her coat and thought of how proud she was of her choice of Halloween costumes. She was going to a friend's party and had decided that she would go with a Mexican Day of the Dead look. Agatha thought that the job she did painting the skull on her face was pretty good. She had a few small birthmarks on her cheeks. The birthmarks were not really that noticeable against her brown skin. Freckles, really, but the face paint had covered them up nicely. Her favorite part were the flowers, a delightful grouping of Gerber daisies around the darkened eye sockets. Still not enjoying the cold weather, Agatha rubbed her arms and looked for the streetcar down the dark road, but there was no sign of it. While staring down Queen Street for her ride, she heard the sound of footsteps behind her, getting closer. She turned around and saw a very dapper, well-coiffed older gentleman. Agatha was trying to decide whether he was wearing a costume or not. He looked somewhat like Dracula, but an older version with perfect white teeth and, of course, all the charm. He was headed her way, stopped at the streetcar stop, and greeted her politely. "Good evening, madam." Agatha responded with, "Good evening, sir." "It does look like a fabulous night for a party, doesn't it? And your costume is simply sublime. Mexican Day of the Dead. You have done an excellent job. You'll be the hit of the party." "Are we going to the same place?" inquired the distinguished, charismatic gentleman. I don't know. Do you know Jessica and Dalton? That's the party I'm off to." "Oh, no, I see. I simply thought you were somebody else. But maybe we can take the streetcar together." As he said that, a streetcar appeared. Agatha hadn't even seen or heard it approach. She must have been distracted by the conversation. The streetcar was one of the super old ones that you could rent for parties and weddings, not the new Toronto Transit Commission streetcar. Agatha did think this was odd, and it seemed like all the windows were darkened somewhat. You couldn't really see into them, which was unusual. The streetcar stopped and opened its doors. The old gentleman stepped on the streetcar, looked back, extended his hand towards her, and asked, "Are you coming, my dear?" Agatha nodded as she took his hand, thinking how old-world chivalrous he was, and climbed up the stairs of the streetcar to begin their trip. The driver was hooded, and his scythe was propped up beside him. She thought it was a creative touch, but wondered how he could see to drive, since the hood covered most of his face. Looking down the cab, she did realize it was a party car. Agatha could see someone dressed up as a pumpkin. Then they caught the pumpkin's eye, and with one of his tentacles, he waved them back to the bar. Wait, tentacles? Was he dressed as a pumpkin or an octopus? Agatha and her companion headed back to the bar, and the pumpkin, octopus, bartender mixed them drinks. His or her tentacles reaching and grabbing glasses and ingredients from everywhere behind the bar, even the ceiling. When it seemed the drinks were ready, their bartender squeaked and apologized, held out one of its tentacles to signal he needed more time. At that point, an enormous black spider descended from the ceiling and landed on a container of olives. He grabbed one, swung over to one glass and dropped it into the drink, then repeated the same action to the remaining glass. Agatha's host picked up both drinks, handed her one, and toasted her with a "Happy Halloween." They both sipped their drinks. It was the most delicious drink Agatha had ever tasted. Was it gin or vodka? It had a slight taste of licorice. But even though she had watched the bartender make it, she couldn't tell what the ingredients were. Looking around the party, Agatha noticed that the scene was dark, but had glittering and flashing lights throughout the cab of the streetcar. The cab also looked much bigger from the inside. Guests were dressed in the most elaborate costumes. There were men and women in big bustle dresses that went all the way to the ground, with white piled-up hair concoctions, silk-clad dancers with extremely long nails, and two tiny mummies wrapped up in rags to their necks to reveal their faces that were painted to look very gray, brown, and dried out. They looked amazing and appeared to be twins. At that moment, both of the leathery-skinned twins caught their eye and drifted over. They spoke to Agatha's companion in a whisper, but he seemed to have no trouble making out the conversation. They seemed to be interested in Agatha's makeup, then reached up and gently touched her face. The twins' touch was very cold, and Agatha felt frozen. That's when her host put his drink down and removed both their hands from her face. Agatha thought she heard him say that she was definitely not for sale. What? Not for sale? What did he mean by that? Agatha looked down, and a very tiny person was seated on a bench that was covered in large, comfortable cushions. She was dressed in white silken robes and was sitting cross-legged. She looked very friendly and gestured for Agatha to sit down beside her. Agatha was still uneasy about the creepy twins, so she was happy to take a seat beside a smiling, warm face. The tiny person introduced herself as Miss D, explained she was granting wishes as party favors, and wanted to know what wish Agatha would like her to grant. Wow, what a party! Agatha smiled, let out a tiny laugh, and asked her to repeat what she had said. Sure enough, she was granting wishes, so Agatha decided to play along. Well, if you could remove the birthmarks on my cheeks, I would appreciate that, Agatha said thoughtfully. I spent a lot of time covering them with makeup tonight. Agatha's wish granter just answered with an inquiring smile. You wish them gone? That's so easy. Wouldn't you like something more significant than that? Agatha felt like she was being a little rude with her mirth at the tiny woman's request, so she decided to play along with a more earnest tone. What would you suggest then? Oh, that's easy. A greater gift would be to be granted the vision to see the glory of all that you are gifted with, and then you would be happy with your freckles. Oh, man, thought Agatha to herself, she isn't buying my attempted dodge. Agatha agreed to the woman's suggestion for a more substantial gift. The tiny woman in white asked Agatha to bend down to her height, and then she gently touched Agatha in between her eyes. They smiled at each other. Agatha thanked her, and then her host interrupted the exchange. "I think it's your stop, madam." Agatha got up, said her farewells, then descended the stairs to the street. By the time she reached the corner, the streetcar was almost out of sight. Agatha walked up Greenwood and then turned down Jessica Street. She felt a little spooked about her trip to the party, for on seeing the lights of Jessica and Dalton's festively decorated house, her spirits lifted. She bounced up their front steps and entered the party. It was a delightful party, but she continued to be distracted by the streetcar ride and those twins touching her face. How could their hands be so cold? It was like they were made of ice. Jessica handed her a drink, and they talked and laughed as the party went on into the night. While everyone was saying good night, Jessica convinced Agatha to stay the night on their sofa. Agatha was relieved she didn't have to take another mysterious streetcar ride home. No frozen touches or wish gifts to worry about, and she began to relax. She said good night to her hosts and went into the bathroom to remove her makeup. She was sad to see it go, but grabbed the face cloth, lathered it up with soap, and gently rubbed the skull and flower makeup off her face. There they were, her tiny constellation of birthmarks. On seeing them, she was not bothered at their appearance. She smiled and thought how amazing the power of suggestion was. Maybe they weren't so bad. Maybe they suited her face. Maybe instead of using the savings she had put away to have laser surgery, she would plan a trip somewhere. Her research on Mexican Day of the Dead was inspiring. So why not a trip to Mexico? She got comfortable under the duvet on her host's large sectional and fell asleep with little doubt that she would be dreaming of her anticipated trip. She could go next year and actually be part of the Day of the Dead celebrations. All she could think about now was the warm Mexican sun hitting her face as she drank cocktails with a hint of licorice on the beach. The end.